Welcome to Generations in Power, the podcast where experience meets insurgence. I'm Arthur Caldwell.
And I'm Jalen Brooks. Today, we're unpacking Secretary of State Marco Rubio's bombshell interview on Bari Weiss's Honestly podcast, where he defended the largest State Department purge in generations.
You know, Jalen, Martin Luther King once warned about the dangers of pragmatism devoid of principle. As I listened to Rubio's clinical dissection of American foreign policy, I found myself, quite unexpectedly, thinking of those words.
Hold up, you're quoting MLK to criticize pragmatism? That's a plot twist I didn't see coming, but sometimes principle without pragmatism leads to catastrophe. We've seen that movie before. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya.
This reorganization isn't just moving furniture around Foggy Bottom. They're eliminating 132 offices dedicated to human rights, democracy promotion, the moral architecture of American foreign policy. Rubio calls it streamlining, but I call it amputating America's conscience.
Damn, Arthur. Next, you'll be growing dreads and joining me at protests. But look, I can't believe I'm saying this. Some of that bureaucracy needed pruning. When human rights becomes just another box to check, another memo requiring 6 signatures, how effective is it really? The system was designed for a world where America was the only power standing. That world's gone.
So we adapt by abandoning our values? What bothers me most is this casual redefinition of America's interests. Rubio says, the national interest in the Middle East is stability, not democracy, not human dignity, just stability. That's what dictators promise, Jalen.
It's called weaponized nostalgia diplomacy, pretending we ever truly prioritize those values over oil and military bases. I've criticized America's hypocrisy on human rights for years, but at least the hypocrisy acknowledged there was a standard we were failing to meet. Now we're not even pretending.
But there's something fundamentally unsustainable about this realism without values approach. When Henry Kissinger practiced realpolitik, at least it was in service of a broader Cold War strategy where America represented something beyond power. What does America represent in Rubio's vision?
Not much more than a maritime shipping security company with nuclear weapons. But I'll say this. Obama's foreign policy was values without realism. Beautiful speeches about the arc of history while Putin carved up Ukraine and Assad gassed his people. Maybe we need both.
On deportations, Rubio gives this clinical explanation about enforcement incentives, but doesn't acknowledge the horror of potentially deporting American citizens to El Salvador's prisons. It's as if the administrative state is being replaced by the administrative void, where policy is whatever the president says in an Oval Office meeting.
I've organized against deportation since Obama was setting records, but even I can see what's happening. Trump's using these high-profile deportations as theater, brutal theater, while actually delivering something conservatives have wanted for decades, a secure border. Meanwhile, progressives are so busy virtue signaling about individual cases, they're missing the forest for the trees.
I feel like a man without a party, Jalen. Republicans used to believe America's greatness came from its ideals, not just its military. Now they're embracing raw power politics with no deeper purpose.
I get that. I really do. Feels like looking in a funhouse mirror sometimes. Conservatives abandoning institutions, progressives suddenly embracing the CIA and FBI. But what's most disturbing about Rubio is how he's recycling all the arguments he once eviscerated.
The Iran deal being the perfect example. After years of calling Obama's nuclear deal with Iran disastrous, he's negotiating one himself using almost identical parameters. It's the foreign policy Mobius strip, where you end up exactly where you started after vehemently heading in the opposite direction.
Classic case of oppositional inheritance syndrome. Come to power hating the previous administration's policies, then realize the constraints are real and end up adopting much of what you criticized. The difference is Rubio isn't even trying to hide the contradiction.
What worries me more is this artificial separation between values and interests. When Rubio says we need a mature foreign policy that balances idealism with pragmatism, it sounds reasonable. But by housing them in different buildings, Aren't we institutionalizing the idea that our values and our interests are fundamentally at odds?
That's exactly what they're doing. Creating the bureaucratic architecture for moral decoupling, where human rights becomes a luxury good we occasionally shop for rather than the foundation of who we are.
I've spent 40 years in Washington navigating between principles and pragmatism, but I always believed they were in conversation with each other, not opposing forces. Tell me something, Jalen. From your perspective, can America project power effectively in a world where we've abandoned what made us exceptional?
The brutal truth? Our so-called values have often been selectively applied window dressing, but they matter precisely because power without purpose corrupts both the wielder and the world. China's building the biggest military in history, but nobody's inspired by Xi Jinping thought. You can't win the future with just pragmatism. People need something to believe in.
That's what I find so perplexing about Rubio's vision. He correctly identifies China as our greatest challenge, but seems to think we can win through industrial policy and military buildup alone. Throughout the Cold War, our greatest advantage was that people behind the Iron Curtain wanted what we had, not just our products, but our freedoms.
The liberty deficit. We're running low on moral capital at exactly the moment we need it most. But let's be real, Rubio's just the messenger for a deeper American confusion. We don't know who we are anymore. The post-war story we told ourselves is exhausted, but we haven't written a new one.
Perhaps what's most telling was Rubio's response to Bari's question about the Emma Lazarus poem on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. He gave this technical answer about how many green cards we issue annually, completely missing the moral dimension.
Because it's easier to count visas than to reckon with what America means, or whether that meaning has expired. But here's where I'll surprise you, Arthur. I think America still needs to stand for something beyond power. Not because it's nice, but because it's necessary. Strategic empathy isn't weak. It's how you build alliances that last.
That may be the first time we've agreed on foreign policy fundamentals, Jalen. Perhaps there's a synthesis emerging between your generation's moral clarity and my generation's strategic patience.
Don't get too excited. I still think half your generation's foreign policy wisdom came from watching too many James Bond movies. But you're right about one thing. Rubio's realism without values can't work. Not because it's immoral, though it is, but because it's incomplete. America needs both power and purpose, or it has neither.
A rare moment of agreement to end on. This is Arthur Caldwell.
And Jalen Brooks. Join us next week on Generations in Power when we'll be discussing the dramatic overhaul of the Department of Education. Until then, stay engaged and stay awake.